Kia ora and welcome to Cultured Conversations. My name is Kirsten Lacey and I am the director of the Auckland Art Gallery Toyo Tamaki. We've created this podcast series to bring together a whole range of issues and ideas around cultural safety, cultural vitality, cultural health of our communities here in Aotearoa New Zealand and across the Tasman to Australia and our broader region. It's a great opportunity to hear from people leading voices at the nexus of a whole range of different in areas of fields of research and endeavour and practice that inform the livelihood of our cultural lives. I'm really excited to be joined today by Ruth DeSouza, a podcaster of her own, but also an academic, really interested and intrigued by having conversations with people herself about indigeneity, cultural safety, and also Indigenous approaches to birthing. What could be more important than the way in which we bring life into the world? Ruth is also the honorary adjunct professor at the Faculty of Health and Environmental Sciences here at AUT, Auckland University of Technology, and has worked in both New Zealand and Australia. Thank you so much for joining me today, Ruth. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Thank you for having me. And you've made the reverse journey, hey?
It's true. You're right. Coming from Australia over to New Zealand, you can have a foot in both countries and not split apart, I think. We try. Ruth, look, just to kick things off, I thought it'd be great for our listeners to hear a bit about what we would say in New Zealand, whakapapa, your history, where you come from, where's your genealogy go to, where does it take you to, and how does it inform what you're passionate about today?
What a wonderful question, Kirsty, and thank you so much for having me. It's such an exciting time to be in Aotearoa with this wonderful exhibition that's on at the Art Gallery at the moment. So I whakapapa to Goa in India, which was a Portuguese colony, and under the Portuguese it led a lot of people to migrate because land was collectively owned. So my grandparents moved to Tanzania in East Africa, which is where I was born. And then we moved to Kenya, and then in the mid-70s we moved to Aotearoa. So it was quite a journey, and at the time we were internally displaced people, and so there was quite a lot of work happening in New Zealand to help bring my father over here, who was a teacher. So I grew up in Titirangi in Auckland, and my life has been very shaped by the experience of migration and colonisation, but also deeply I've had a deep kind of embedding in Māori culture, but also Pasifika cultures. So I also went to high school in the Kingdom of Tonga. And then I did my nursing education, worked in mental health at the Old Carrington Hospital. So I've had a lot of time working in that space. I also worked at 393 Methadone Clinic on Great North Road back in the day, and worked as a community mental health nurse all around central Auckland. So I used to be on the crisis team, be on call overnight in Auckland, and also do emergency department liaison. Then in 1995 set up a perinatal mental health team here in Auckland at Green Lane Hospital, and we also had support groups for people, supported the community mental health teams, and then moved into education from there, worked at Unitec and at AUT, and then finished my PhD, and there was no work to be found. So moved to Melbourne. That was the reason for migrating there. But, most of my life has been spent here, and it's really shaped how I kind of think and feel about things.
Amazing. So your podcast series, Birthing and Justice, you talk to women all over the world. Why this topic?
Yes, that's a great question. One of the main reasons is that we all have to come into the world. And usually when we come into the world, we're surrounded by other people. But we sometimes leave the world alone, right? But when I started working at National Women's Hospital, I was really struck and confronted by the factory system of birth. So in my mind, I'd been working in acute mental health services for quite a while by that time. And I was sort of thinking birth was this beautiful thing, like the treasures adverts of little rainbows and butterflies and happy times. And what I found about the system of birth was it was like a factory. So it didn't matter what people's backgrounds were, but they were processed in a pretty identical way. And so this universal system was kind of doing violence to women, I thought, and birthing people, in the sense that they might have had different needs, but they were being treated exactly the same. So I'd like to give you an example of that. I remember on my first day, when you're a newbie and you're shadowing someone, and the person who was looking after me said, "Ruth, go and put this ice pack on the woman in room X." So off I went, and an ice pack was basically a bunch of ice cubes wrapped in a cloth. And so I went up to this woman who turned out to be Chinese, and I said, "Look, this is going to help any soreness that you have." And this was kind of standard practice. And she said, "Oh, I don't want anything cold on me. In our culture, we've got to stay warm." And it was kind of that first kind of inkling that there might be different ways in which the hospital system could respond to culturally diverse women. And that was the beginning of many, many, many examples of seeing something that was seemingly ordinary, but it could also kind of cause harm. We talk about nurses and midwives being the most trusted kind of profession, but we also know there are great health inequalities, both in Aotearoa and in Australia. So I've been very, very interested in how seemingly ordinary, helpful things are actually ways of reducing the mana of people. And so my work has been very orientated to how do we share with people who support those who are birthing, that there are many ways in which you can restore and uplift the mana of people and really nurture and care for them at a time where everything gets in, everything is felt so deeply in birthing.
In the Western education world around birthing and antenatal care, is there cultural teaching that takes place to help practitioners understand how to better cater to a diversity of birthing families?
There is. So cultural safety is something world leading that originated in Aotearoa among Māori nurses. It's this idea that there are power relations in the delivery of services, that the person that enters a healthcare service experiences maybe some anxiety, confusion, fear, and they need looking after and care. But somehow, in the process of entering a culture that has its own distinct culture, health services have their own culture, hospitals have their culture, services, whether it's education, health, justice, have a culture, which is primarily Pākehā. So cultural safety is that idea where people are invited to interrogate their own culture as bearers of culture. And I think for Pākehā, it's revolutionary because it's saying, who are you when you walk into a space? What power relations are you bringing? And what is the impact of who you are? So cultural safety is something that's been part of the curriculum a very long time for nurses and midwives. There's a lot of work happening in that space, but I also think we don't know very much about what happens once people graduate. So they might get all this beautiful education about how something should be, but then all these tender-hearted, beautiful people that want to help other people, when they encounter the system, which I've described as a factory before to you, when they enter the system, somehow some of that gets crushed. And I'm very interested in that crushing and how we can prevent it, because people have the knowledge, but it's whether they feel they have the agency once they become part of a system. And this applies to lots of systems, right?
But it's not just about catering to difference, is it? I mean, the opportunity here is in fact for the Pākehā birthing system to change as well.
Exactly. So I see it as very transformative because it's about saying the person who's the recipient of care and if we're thinking about art galleries and justice systems and education, the person that's receiving what the institution is offering is the one that makes the call about whether it's safe or not. So, people will just stop using a system if it's unsafe. And if you're a Pākehā system that doesn't care about why, then you won't ask the questions. But if you do care, then there's a really beautiful opportunity for exploration. What values, what beliefs do we hold about who can use this service or space? Who's our ideal imagined user? And what I'm trying to do in my podcast is really broaden that out and say there are so many beautiful imagined users, and here are their stories, and here are the people that are also trying to transform the systems of birth so that everyone's mana is really upheld when they go through this massive transformative process of becoming a family.
I want to go to the question of birth itself. And what is the impact for a birthing mother when she is able to effectively practice birthing in a way that is natural and also culturally informed by her and her family?
For me, the question that's important here is that the birthing person or woman feels as if their wishes and their desires are supported by the system. Yeah. So natural might be the best thing for someone, but it might also be that they need other kinds of support or intervention. The important thing is that whoever is birthing is supported to birth in the way that's right for them, whether it's, so-called natural or whether they need the support of the best knowledge that we have to make this a good experience, yeah. And so, it's also about how much involvement can whānau have, how much support can the partner provide and be resourced to, so there's all those things because the birth is, in every culture is a deeply celebrated, valued, important thing, yeah. So how the community is supported is also really important.
I was interviewing in one of my other episodes, Carlo Miller, who's a wonderful poet here in New Zealand, and we were talking about the word whenua. And in fact, the first collection gallery, when you come to Auckland Art Gallery, is looking at whenua, the land, and then we start to look at the people as you move through the gallery spaces and tell different stories through artwork. But this word whenua, Carlo was explaining to me, in many languages throughout the Pacific, means both land and placenta. And I just wondered if you might reflect on how creation mythology or narratives that you've encountered in your time speak to the language of whenua and placenta and birthing.
Yes, Carlo's a very good friend of mine, so I know her very well, and she would have given you the most eloquent and beautiful response to that question. Whenua is important in so many cultures beyond the Pacific. So my mother, who has migrated twice, still has little umbilical cords. She still has all three girls, the umbilical cords of all three girls. So, this connection of, how we are anchored to our mother and how we might be anchored to place is common to other parts of the world too, which I think is really magical and beautiful.
Not only have you been involved in Indigenous birthing practices and leading positive and affirmative change there, you've also been in a leadership conversation, and you're here in New Zealand as part of a leadership forum co-designing or redesigning a leadership program for First Nations people in Australia. I wanted to get your thoughts about what co-design means, firstly. What does co-design mean in the leadership space, and what have we got to learn from First Nation leaders?
Beautiful. I'm really excited about the leadership conversation, and I'm particularly honoured and privileged to have been invited to Aotearoa, my old home, and the opportunity to facilitate a gathering between 15 arts leaders who are, whose country is Australia, but also the Torres Strait. And the plan for our time together is this opportunity to kind of zoom out from life in Australia to engage in a different cultural context while also enjoying this amazing exhibition you've got on at the art gallery called Ever Present, and to engage in conversations about our own leadership journeys and what kind of transformative process we might build for future leaders in Australia. And your question about co-design is really interesting because I think it's a huge buzzword. In mental health, we're talking a lot about co-production and co-creating, and there's a lot of terminology around that. So I'll break it down the way my friend Emma Blomkamp does. So she talks about co, meaning cooperation, collaboration, and then design being what are the ways we can work together to address complex problems where many, many people coming together can bring different ways of looking at the problem. And one of my favourite people is Mariam Kaba, and she says, whatever's worth doing is worth doing with other people, yeah? And so I've kind of designed this program for 2 days where we're going to look at people's own journeys of leadership, both good and bad, and work on developing the perfect one or an amazing one. And I'm so excited about that because, in a way, my leadership journey started in 1985 when I was sent by Rotary on a youth leadership course in Whangarei. And so I've been really interested in it. And I'm also a little bit skeptical about the rah-rah idea of leadership because I think leadership is also about who believes in you, who's with you, who's around you, and where are you going and what are you doing? So it's a really beautiful time to be doing that. I'm also a mentor in Australia for women in digital health leadership, which is really exciting. So it's a really interesting time, I think, to have these conversations and to think about what it means to be a leader in Australia, but to be looking at it from here in Aotearoa in a very kind of different cultural context that's also very dynamic. So I think we're going to have a lot of fun. And the other thing about co-design is it's not just about listening and talking. It's about playing. It's about making. It's about creating. And having the best conversations. And those conversations might be while having a walk or being in a kayak or all kinds of things. So that's what we're going to be doing, having a lot of fun.
Well, you do have completely different conversations depending on the context that you're in, isn't that the case? Yeah.
And I think I'm depending a lot also on what I've learned from being tauiwi here, but also engaging with Māori, the values of manakitanga, the values of whakawhanaungatanga. So that's a really important part of our process, So we've got people like Rosanna Raymond joining us. We're meeting lots of Māori artists. We're spending a lot of time at the gallery. And it's kind of in those moments that I think all the deep kind of knowledge is going to be surfaced, cooking together, catching the ferry and doing fun things like that. Because I think it's also those informal conversations around lots of structured activities where magic happens. And, I think about all the Māori wānanga I've been on where beautiful things happen. So, yeah, that's the plan.
Mm. Look, I think there's so much to gain from this work that you're doing and to create spaces where people can share their journey but also be challenged.
Yes.
And in that space, to be challenged in a way where you have an openness to learning and a curiosity to perspective taking. And I guess I'm curious to know if you might have advice for someone like me, an Australian leading an institute, a major gallery here in New Zealand, about how to approach those kinds of provocations and opportunities, I guess, and to be able to open a door to people to feel able, I guess, to have conversation with me about what they're seeking from their art gallery and all that it does here in the community.
Yeah, I believe that when people offer critique, it means they care about the kaupapa. Yeah,
It's true.
So, if I'm not invested in something, then I might not bother to provide the time and the input into a particular thing. But if I really care about it, then I will critique. And I'll give you an example. I did my PhD about the experiences of migrant women that had a baby in Aotearoa. And I interviewed them. And some of the feedback about Plunket, for example, which provides maternal and childcare support to new parents. Some of the feedback was incredible and beautiful, and then there was some other stuff around women not feeling culturally safe. And I think for me it was like, I really care about Plunket because I've had a 20-year relationship with them, right? And so how we frame the message of feedback's also important, but also developing a capacity to listen to things we might not want to hear. And I think that's the thing, is seeing feedback as an opportunity to improve the quality of what we do. And so my advice to you might be your advice to me, I don't know. But, what I've learned from moving to Australia and being around some really fantastic Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander friends has been just shut up and listen. I think that's the only lesson that I would give or offer, because for me, I think if you're quiet and you pay attention, that's where the learning happens. The other word I really love is curiosity, but also managing that curiosity in a way that isn't intrusive. So not being an interrogator, like, oh, why are you doing this? What's that happening? What, being quiet, paying attention, because actually the answers all kind of come if you're open and you're really paying attention to the context. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ruth. It's great to have you join me in this episode.
Thank you for having me. It's been great talking to you, and really looking forward to seeing more of the exhibition.
For sure. You've been listening to Cultured Conversation. I'm your host, Kirsten Lacey, joined today by Ruth DeSouza. You can dip into other episodes at www.aucklandartgallery.com or on iHeartRadio or Business Desk here in New Zealand, or any of your other favourite podcast platforms.